Hi, everyone. Welcome to the MDR ThreatCast, February 2025 edition. My name is Greg Idden, a security strategist, although really I should probably updating that. I'm now dubbed Services Architect for MDR. Joining me are some fabulous people that you probably met before. We've got Jordan Olness from Threat Intelligence, as well as Colin Cowie from Threat Intelligence. And we've also got Pavla Kulam, who's going to be taking us through the threat hunt aspects. In terms of agenda, we're going to follow the typical kind of structure we follow, which is we'll do threat landscape, what we've been seeing in the kind of wider industry and across the kind of world and what's been going on. And then we're going to dive into kind of the observed threat activity, what we've been observing within MDR. Then we'll move over to some threat hunting highlights, and then we'll do a roundup of the kind of XOps kind of communications and news articles that we've been posting, and then we'll finally take Q&A at the end. This question I'm sure will pop up, it usually does, but what we'll do is this is going to be recorded. If you have any questions at all, we fire them in the Q&A panel. If you look on the right of your screen, you'll see a chat panel, a Q&A panel, and we'll either answer them sort of live as we go. I'll interject with the speaker and ask them the question, or we'll reply to you in text, or we'll hold on to them and take them at the end of the session. This is being recorded. As I said at the start, people always ask this. This is being recorded. You will be able to watch this back. You will either be able to see it inside this platform. So if you connect after this into the same URL, you should be able to watch the on-demand recording, or what we usually do is we'll upload this to the MDR community channel within the next 24 hours or so, and the link for that will be shown towards the end. So without further ado, let's go and push on some content. I think first up, we're going to be having Jordan Olness, if you want to come on stage, and Jordan's going to take us through the threat landscape. All right, Jordan.
All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jordan Olness. Let's take a look at that threat landscape. Okay. Starting off in vulnerability land, let's talk about Palo Alto Network's PAN-OS vulnerability tracked as CVE 2025-0108. Now, this is an authentication bypass vulnerability in the management web interface, and it's got a CVSS score of 8.8. This was discovered by a group called Asset Note. It was responsibly disclosed to Palo Alto, and that gave Palo Alto some time to come up with the patch. But while they were doing that, Asset Note was putting together a blog article detailing everything about the vulnerability. Both the patch and the blog article were released on February 12th, with a proof of concept coming up shortly thereafter. Then on February 13th, Gray Noise started reporting active exploitation. Following that, on February 18th, CISA added this vulnerability to their known exploited vulnerabilities database, or the KEV for short. So not a lot of turnaround time to get patches applied. Thankfully, it is not all bad news on this one. This vulnerability only applies to, is only remotely exploitable when an organization has the management web interface exposed to the internet. If you don't have that exposed, you're not vulnerable. So what does that mean in terms of impact? Well, a group called the Shadow Server Foundation reported about 3,600 servers like this with the web management portal exposed on the internet when they started seeing exploitation in the wild. I've been seeing that number dropping off as time has gone on. Last I saw about 3,200 still out there and dropping. So let's move on. Let's talk about the SonicWall Sonic OS vulnerability tracked as CVE 2024-53704. This is an authentication bypass vulnerability in their SSL VPN products. I don't know why the National Vulnerability Database and CISA disagree on the CVSS score, but it's either 8.8 or 9.8, depending on who you ask. Now, what does this vulnerability allow an attacker to do? Well, it lets them hijack an active VPN session on the device. Official patches were released January 7th, so there's been a bit of time there. A detailed write-up was published by a group called Bishop Fox on February 10th, and shortly thereafter, proof of concept code starts appearing in the wild, and February 18th, it is added to that CISA KEV database, indicating that it is under active exploit. So just to make clear, there has been no observed exploitation in the Sophos MDR customer base, but don't take that as a license to not take these seriously. By all means, follow those manufacturer best practices, avoid exposing unnecessary services to the internet like those management portals, and as always, apply those official product updates, especially in a timely manner. Okay, moving right along, let's talk about some notable news. There's been some interesting law enforcement action targeting the 8base ransomware group. So, 8base, if you're not familiar, they are a ransomware group that was rather prolific in the 2023-2024 kind of scene. This is a part of the Phobos ransomware family, and 8base filled out a notch that was they were kind of innovators in the Phobos ransomware ecosystem. They were the first to engage in what's called dual extortion, which, if you're not familiar, that's where they encrypt the files with ransomware, but they also exfiltrate sensitive files and hold those for a ransom, again, for an extortion purpose. So what happened in this case? Well, law enforcement agencies from 14 different countries conducted a coordinated operation to arrest and disrupt the 8base ransomware group. There were 4 Russian nationals arrested, as well as 27 servers seized. There's currently no word on what country these people were arrested in, but it's a fairly good guess that it wasn't Russia. Phobos, especially the entire Phobos ecosystem, they tend to target small to medium businesses the most. So we're really glad to see groups like 8base being targeted, because that's a really big part of our customer base in MDR here. In addition to these arrests, not all is well in Phobos land. The main Phobos administrator was arrested late in 2024, as well as a key affiliate was arrested in 2023. So it seems like law enforcement is getting making some progress in eliminating that Phobos ransomware threat. As always, law enforcement is only aware of what's reported to them. So if you do experience a breach or an incident like this, by all means, please report it to the authorities so they can understand what is a threat to more people. We've got an example for NCSC for the UK government there, but by all means, check with your local government and or law enforcement agencies. Okay, moving right along, let's talk about notable breaches. This one's a bit of a notable breach of a different type. Now it's the bad guys getting breached. So, what happened here? February 11th, an individual named who goes by Exploit Whispers released the internal chat logs belonging to the Black Basta ransomware group. This covers a time frame of about September 2023 to about September 2024. Similar to the Conti leaks, the Black Basta's group's internal operations are now being thoroughly examined by security researchers. Now, for a bit of context, Black Basta was already experiencing quite a bit of turmoil behind the scenes before this breach happened. Prominent members of Black Basta had already left and joined the Cactus ransomware group. It's not yet known whether this Exploit Whispers is a disgruntled former member or if maybe it was a security researcher that came upon the information. We still don't know. But what we do know is that a lot of that internal strife behind the scenes was driven by Black Basta suddenly targeting Russian banks, which is usually a big no-no in ransomware land. So, as of right now, cybersecurity professionals are poring over the information within and have an opportunity to understand the inner workings of a very successful ransomware group. Law enforcement also has an opportunity here. There's a lot of sensitive information that I'm sure the Black Basta ransomware operators don't want falling into law enforcement hands, but they don't have a choice anymore. So, a bit of advice. One thing that we're noticing, we're finding victims in the data that we didn't know about before. So this would be groups and companies that were hit with Black Basta ransomware but paid the ransom to keep their name secret. Just keep in mind that paying a ransom is not going to guarantee that your name is not going to get out there because of exactly these kinds of leaks and breaches. So keep that in mind going forward. Moving right along, let's finish off here with some ransomware leak site analysis. As you can see, Ransom Hub had another massive month, far and away had the most victims posted on their data leak site. followed by Play Ransomware and Lynx Ransomware, rounding out the top three, followed by that Cactus that we mentioned just a few moments ago. If we look at the heat mapping, you can see that Ransom Hub made a lot of posts towards the middle of the month there, but also had quite a bit of posts outside of that. And as we rank the posts versus last month, we see that the Monty Ransomware group, Play Ransomware, and Ransom House groups rose in the rankings quite a bit, whereas that Black Basta fell quite hard. I don't think they had any posts this month, as well as Eldorado and Space Bears. That one's another Phobos variant. They fell in the rankings quite a bit. So that's going to do it for me. I think it's time for observed threat activity with my colleague, Colin Cowie.
Thank you for that introduction. Let's go right into the observed threat activity from February of 2025. To start, let's talk about the most active ransomware over the past month. These are ransomware families that we've seen across Sophos MDR and incident response. Number one is Qlin. Qlin has been around since 2022 and has been observed in multiple different types of campaigns, one of which recently involved phishing targeting IT-related users. Qlin ransomware is advertised widely on Russian-speaking cybercrime forums. They offer a 80%-20 split, which is pretty much the standard for ransomware as a service. One of the things that they try to do to differentiate themselves is they say if you are making over 3 million in a single ransom payment, that you get 85% instead of 80-20. And additionally, like most of these ransomware as a service programs that are offered on these Russian-speaking cybercrime forums, they have guidelines and rules in place that limit where you're allowed to actually execute them, meaning they don't want their affiliates to encrypt organizations based out of Russia and Russia-affiliated countries. Ink Ransomware is also a ransomware as a service program that's advertised widely on forums. They also have a 80%-20% split where the affiliate who performed the ransomware gets 80% of the payment, whereas the administrators get 20%. One of the things that they advertise to try to differentiate themselves is a service where their administrators will have people call the victims who have been impacted by ransomware and attempt to harass them to get them to pay the ransom. Two of these ransomware families that are on the top 5 do not have any advertisements, but we believe they are affiliate-based models that are just privately recruiting, and that would be 3AM Ransomware and Akira. For 3AM Ransomware, there's some research that indicates a former Lockbit affiliate is now active. However, there isn't any semi-private or publicly known recruiting related to 3AM Ransomware or Akira. And the last one that I'll mention for this month is Dragon Force. Dragon Force offers 80% of the payments to affiliates, and specifically one of the things that they do to try to differentiate is provide their affiliates with specific tools to help them with actually launching the ransomware and offer a variety of different ransomware payloads available. So within the Dragon Force criminal affiliate portal, you can choose to create a ransomware that's either built using the leaked Conti ransomware source code, which was leaked in 2022, or source code related to the leaked Lockbit ransomware builder. And another interesting note about Dragon Force is they actually require their affiliates to show proof that they've exfiltrated data from a victim organization before they will let you build a ransomware sample to target that company, whereas other ransomware as a service programs have affiliates who sometimes might not encrypt data or sometimes might not exfiltrate data, depending on the situation. Now let's talk about some specific campaigns over the past month that are noteworthy. The first one that I wanted to mention is Simple Help. You may remember from the past ThreatCast when we talked about this vulnerability as one to watch. I want to provide a recap kind of timeline of how this went down and what we observed. At the end of last year, a research organization that specializes in vulnerability research reached out to Simple Help, which is a remote management software provider, to let them know about vulnerabilities in their product, multiple vulnerabilities that they identified that were critically rated. By the middle of January, that research organization published a blog where they shared details on the vulnerability. The next day, CVEs were assigned, and within 1 week of that blog going public, threat actors started to operationalize the vulnerabilities and exploit various victims, specifically in the retail sector, where this software was embedded within a different program that was sold or advertised. So some of the victims that were impacted didn't necessarily know that they had simple help within their network because of the nature of this software being embedded within other software packages. 6 days later, so 2 weeks after the initial blog, we identified further activity, specifically related to threat actors that were attempting to kill antivirus products, as well as pivot to multiple other systems. Our threat hunting team identified multiple threat actors deploying a remote management tool called Cloudflare Tunnel. Cloudflare Tunnel is a reverse proxy tool that is used for some legitimate purposes, so it's not outright blocked as malicious by default, but it is able to be blocked in Sophos Central under application control. And just some general advice and takeaways related to this past campaign is to have a good understanding or a software bill of materials related to what your vendors are leveraging to provide you different services. I think in general, one takeaway is that most of the victims who were impacted by this vulnerability were not anticipating that they would have been impacted by this vulnerability because they didn't necessarily have a good understanding of the software that their vendors were leveraging. And now for the second campaign that I wanted to highlight, this is a very well-known and infamous affiliate that we track as Stack 5381. We've been tracking them for multiple years. They've been around since the start of dual impact ransomware, which involves data theft and extortion. All the way back in 2020, they were a member of the Ryuk ransomware as a service. In 2021 is when we started to really see data exfiltration take off in the ransomware as a service world. This specific affiliate has a malware family called Xmatter that helps enable them to exfiltrate data. And that's where they really gained a lot of their success and rise into the rankings in the criminal underground. In 2022, they were active in a lot of different ransomware programs before finally settling on Conti until that was shut down a year later. Then we saw them use Black Cat or Alpha V. And if you were here on the ThreatCast last year, you might remember that we talked about law enforcement action that disrupted Black Cat, or formerly known as Alpha V. This ransomware affiliate then moved to Lockbit, which also eventually was shut down by law enforcement. And then now in 2024, last year, they moved to a new ransomware as a service program called Ransom Hub, which is still around and popular. However, just at the end of the year in December, we observed this affiliate moving to a new ransomware program called Termite ransomware. And Termite ransomware hasn't really been reported on that much, but based off of some of our past observations with this affiliate, we've highlighted the general core tools, tactics, and procedures on the bottom left of the slide. Specifically, this affiliate leverages initial access brokers. So these are people who are selling logs of victims who maybe clicked on information stealing malware or potentially had a brute force VPN credential. So they'll gain access in a variety of different ways, but generally it's through a valid account credential. From there, they try to remain pretty stealthy and avoid running a malware that would trigger alerts. They leverage a tool called OpenSSH, which is actually built into Windows operating system and can also be blocked in Sophos application control. They use OpenSSH to establish reverse connections to their external C2s. And then we observed a threat actor leveraging a open source penetration testing tool called Hashcats to try to crack password hashes. So having good password security is another defensive control that can make life harder for this threat actor. And finally, at the end stages of the intrusion, this threat actor is known to deploy Windows group policy objects that help them distribute tools to collect data. And so in general, limiting access to domain admin's account can be another method to make life harder for these ransomware affiliates. And that's it for this month's Observed Threat Activity.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. Hello, everyone. Let's jump into a few of the hunts that we prepared for this month. And one of them is directly tied to what Colin was discussing earlier, which is the simple help exploit. We wanted to give a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the work that the threat hunting team has performed, in part to support the actual investigation and the research into this exploitation, and provide a little bit of context around what kind of technical artifacts we were looking for when we were hunting through the environment. In this case, the Simple Help vulnerability is actually a set of vulnerabilities. There's 3 that were published. All 3 utilize different aspects of Simple Help architecture and infrastructure as a whole. And all 3 have their very own distinct objectives as to what they're trying to achieve when exploited. In this case, whether each one of those 3 were exploited was relatively irrelevant for our purposes for threat hunting, as we were actually looking for the post-exploitation activity that is associated with a vulnerable instance of Simple Help, as well as the ones that are actually self-hosted on-prem. So in this case, we're actually looking for the post-exploitation commands that are being run on that server, and any of the subsequent deployments of malicious binaries and other malware families, for example, as a result of the exploitation. As a result of the threat hunting, we've actually identified 9 different instances where anomalous events were observed. And this was a bit of a challenge because we had to kind of sift through a lot of the normal tech support type events that would normally occur through Simple Help, because that is the purpose of the actual software suite itself. So let's take a little bit the deeper dive look into what Simple Help is and how it works. So Simple Help is a remote help desk solution. It's what we call the RMM, remote management and monitoring tool. And in this case, the architecture itself is relatively simple. It utilizes a server client architecture with a communication proxy that kind of proxies the events and the commands that are being run from a server or a technician to a customer. And as a corresponding rule set, there are 3 different types of accounts that are associated with Simple Help architecture. First one is the administrator account, then we have the technician account and the customer account. Administrator accounts are used to administer the actual platform itself, the infrastructure, the architecture, the deployments, the servers that are being run. The administrator accounts are also used to set up accounts. They're used to set up configuration of the actual server itself, and all the permissions as well for not only the accounts, but also what types of commands are allowed to be run, and what kind of commands can be actually executed on the customer's systems. Technician accounts are accounts associated with technicians who are actually providing tech support. So it allows them access to remote desktops, remote endpoints, and allows them a certain subset of commands to be run remotely. Again, these are all governed and provisioned by the administrator account. And then you have your customer accounts and your customer agents that are being deployed and installed on the actual endpoints themselves. And they are just used as a recipient of the technical support that is coming from the technician account. And they are the platform where these commands are being actually executed. So relatively simple and standard deployment for a remote help desk solution. But in this case, we're going to talk a little bit about what made it challenging, especially with this subset of exploits. So in this case, there are 3 different exploits, like I mentioned. The first one is associated with an unauthenticated path traversal, which allows the attackers to actually download files from the Simple Help server. Downloading the files in and of itself would not be an issue, except that there are certain configuration files that contain hash values of the Simple Help admin account. And Simple Help admin is like your default kind of root account, administrative account for Simple Help that actually has the majority of privileges being used to configure the platform, configure the deployment, and configure accounts as well that are associated with that specific deployment. So obviously, having access to that file and those hashes will be a major asset to a threat actor trying to compromise an environment. The second vulnerability is associated with arbitrary file upload and remote code execution as an admin. So this specific vulnerability does require admin level privileges, and it allows the attackers to actually upload files which can then be executed by the system itself, usually the servers or the proxy servers that would actually execute commands themselves. So in this case, for example, in Linux, you can actually have a cron tab file that would actually have a subset of commands to be run on demand or as part of a certain timeline on a Linux machine. And then similarly, on the Windows server, it can also be used to override executables or any of the default libraries being used by this specific deployment of simple help. Both of these instances allow for remote code execution, and generally these codes are going to be associated with some secondary stage payload that is going to be deployed onto the servers, which is going to then establish persistence and allow the attackers further access to the systems and the environment itself. Now, the third one is actually maybe should have been the first one, but this is the general vulnerability that allows privilege escalation. So most of these will require some sort of a privileged account access. However, this third one actually allows for the attackers to elevate their privileges from an unprivileged account to a privileged one that actually allows for either download or upload of files or download or upload of remote code. So in this case, this actually allows for a low privileged technician account to elevate its privileges to either a higher privileged technician account or an admin account. And due to the fact that there are certain lacks in checks for the actual admin privileges and functions within the simple help vulnerable version of the software suite, it allows for that backend execution to occur and for the privilege escalation to occur as well. So in this case, generally an attacker chain would start with the first one, the 57726. If there is no already an existing privileged account access, they will utilize this specific vulnerability and exploitation to elevate their privileges, and then they would pivot over into either 57727 in case that they do need the full admin, the simple help admin account access and the hash value of the password, or the 57728, which allows for the upload of remote codes through either Linux or Windows type infrastructure. So this set, it's basically a set of vulnerabilities that when worked together allows for the exploitation of the entire suite itself. So in this case, the way that we were performing our hunts, again, we were focusing mainly on the post-exploitation activities. So again, one of the challenges was to look through what are some of the commonly used commands that our technicians are using to actually provide tech support, because tech support in and of itself is going to provide some sort of technical command execution as part of troubleshooting. I actually put in a note here saying significant number of printer troubleshooting commands, which was interesting to see because a majority of the actual instances where we did see events where the parent process of simple help, which is remote access.exe, was running command line commands. And in this case, majority of these commands were troubleshooting printers, which kind of goes to show what most of the simple help assistance was actually being used for. Once we eliminated and filtered out a lot of these events associated with your kind of run-of-the-mill tech support, hey, can you fix my my save folders or get my files back or things like that, we started actually identifying some of the more malicious and anomalous types of executions, which was then further supported by actually involving within the parent-child chain also another process called WinPTY agent 64. WinPTY is a binary that is used to allow for quasi-terminal access to a remote machine. Generally, it gets packaged with other remote access terminal-style software suites, but in this case, it can be used as a standalone process as well. And once we started including this specific process into our parent-child links, we actually started identifying a lot of the reconnaissance and remote execution commands that were then associated with suspected exploitation. So in this case, the screenshot, it might be a little bit harder to see, but the chain itself goes from remote access, which is the simple help executable, into the WinPTY agent executable as a child. And then there's a grandchild that what we call a grandchild process spawned from there, a command line, which then in turn spawns a net.exe. And net.exe can be used for many things, whether it's lateral movements, whether it's reconnaissance of other machines, and then ultimately for also adding new privileged users, privileged accounts, modifying administrative accounts and things like that. So in this case, it actually did allow us to, when we included this terminal binary, it did allow us to actually uncover a lot more of these suspected cases, which kind of goes hand in hand with the 9 cases that we already discussed before. So an interesting kind of look into that post-exploitation activities. Again, once we filtered out all of the Run-of-the-mill stuff, we start identifying things that we would consider to be anomalous, which kind of goes hand in hand with baselining and understanding what an environment looks like normally and what it should not look like when you actually look at the parent-child processes. So to kind of close this out, this is an example of some of the filtering that we've conducted as part of it. Again, a little bit harder to see, but you can actually identify some of the printer type events that we've identified. In this case, we're looking mainly into the remote access.exe into our child process of command line. And then from there, we can also start including, you can even replace from CMD directly as a child process to the WinPTY, and then go from there into the CMD and look into what are their child processes that are being spawned as a result of that chain. So interesting hunt nonetheless, and a very, very good result as an output. Jumping into the second one, we're going to be talking a little bit about time stomping. In this case, time stomping process execution via PowerShell. For those of you who may not be aware, time stomping is just a name for a technique of modifying timestamps of files, either the modification, deletion, creation timestamps of files on a disk, which is usually used by attackers to evade capture or evade any sort of monitoring tools, because a lot of these monitoring tools, as well as analytics tools and forensics tools, rely on timelining events from start to finish, chronologically what has occurred. And when you are modifying timestamps of certain events, you can exclude that from a data set that you're potentially collecting, which could be used to evade XDR type monitoring or evade post-forensics activities as well, and allow the attackers to stay hidden and undetected. So in this case, we're looking at a technique that is being used through PowerShell to actually change reliable time source settings on a system, which would allow them to potentially avoid detection. So how does this work? Windows itself, the way that it manages daytime, there's a couple of different techniques that you can manage this, depending whether it's a server or just a workstation. More often than not, this is all configured through GPO. If it's on a domain, GPO can be used to kind of set across the entire group, entire domain, a specific set of time servers. These time servers are called, or NTP servers, the time servers, the network time protocol servers, are being used as the definitive or reliable source of synchronization of time, so that every machine on a specific domain is going to have the exact same time, exact same date across the board. There's no deviation. This is generally set, like I said, through GPO. However, sometimes it can also be set manually. If it's set manually, more often than not, it is set through control panel.